From the Lerner and Lowe musical My Fair Lady. That was the original Eliza Doolittle, an exhilarated Julie Andrews singing I Could Have Danced All Night this Wednesday morning. A selection on the program in tomorrow afternoon's Women in Musical Theatre concert featuring Winnipeg's own Jillian Willems, who joins me now. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. Julie Andrews, does it get any more classic than that?
Not really, although in my research, I realized that the classics are never ending.
Yeah, it's true. The list keeps growing.
It sure
right?
does.
But really, Julie Andrews, a living legend, My Fair Lady, Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, the list goes on and on and on. And of course, features in tomorrow's program. Just before we get into the specifics, Jillian, can you tell us a little bit more about the idea behind the show?
Yeah, so I was asked by Carla Burbrayer, producer of Music N Mavens, to perform in the summer at the Gwen Sector Center. And I had kind of been mulling over what kind of themes I'd like to explore. And as a woman in musical theater myself, I sort of felt like it was a great jumping off point to start looking at the performers that we associate these roles with. And so I started chronologically. I went back in time. I think I started around the 30s, and then I just started looking up any woman on Broadway who had made their mark. And the list is growing still.
Yeah, it certainly is. Before we get to some of those names, can you talk a little bit more about your experience? You alluded to it, your experience as a woman in musical theater?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people understand this feeling, but there's actually more roles for men in musicals than there are for women. And then there's also a lot less men in performance arts. And so a lot of times we get that like one shot to be the star, and then you sort of have to hope and pray for ensemble. So there aren't actually a lot of opportunities to sing this music. And so I think part of the draw for me of doing this topic was an opportunity to actually unleash this music on the world and selfishly to get to perform it myself.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the best of both worlds, right? You get to perform, but you also get to share these names and reintroduce some of these leading ladies and people who may not necessarily have the spotlight, but who are so deserving of it, right? So
Exactly.
I'm sure it's going to be a great program. And before we get to chatting more about that, you yourself have been active in the Winnipeg theater community and beyond, and your credits include performances with Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, Manitoba Theatre for Young People, Edmonton Opera, Regina Symphony, Rainbow Stage. Jillian, you've had a good deal of success.
Yeah.
I know you're an accomplished director and choreographer, but is performance your first love?
Yes. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. So the reason I came to theater in general was through performance and specifically through music first.
I was going to ask about that. Was it musical theater specifically, or were you doing the art song thing? Okay, we'll talk more about that.
So when I was little, I have this memory, and I'm probably wrong, but this was my experience, and my mom will probably correct me. But she used to want space from me. Naturally, I'm a very strong personality. And so she would put me in the basement with different VHS tapes of different musicals because she knew that I would just sit there, watch them, and then when they were over, I would rewind and start again. So things like Sound of Music were some of those first ones. And then I also remember ruining the tape of a chorus line by watching it so much.
No way. You burned through it.
Burned right through it. Yeah.
So apart from, performing in the basement along with the VHSs, do you remember your first performance in a musical?
Okay, well, I remember my first audition, which also happened to be for The Sound of Music, Rainbow Stage 1995 or 6. Yeah. And I was auditioning for Gretel. And that would have been my first sort of like I don't think I even knew the term musical theater. Even though I had been consuming musical theater, no one said to me, okay, this is a musical.
What it is. Yeah.
And so when the opportunity to audition came along, spoiler alert, I didn't get it, and I'm still bitter. But
yeah, you made it to Rainbow, though.
But I eventually made it to Rainbow. Yeah. But I didn't even know what a musical was. And so my mom said, do you want to audition? And I was like, whatever, I get to sing in front of people. So I remember that specifically. And then, of course, as we all know, we do music festival. That's how we sort of get acquainted with performance. And it's so funny because it's such an anxiety-inducing event.
Yeah, I had the sweaty palms. I was at the sweaty palms.
Yeah. Like singing at this hour, basically, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And you're like 16 years old singing like a not age-appropriate song. But,
it happens.
It's what we do. That's the experience.
And I did the thing with the change voice. So, I mean, it was just cracks galore,
Right.
Jillian. It was a wild experience.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring that up. And I mean, like that first experience of a formal audition, it's interesting, too, because he got into it almost professionally from a young age then, rather than going through school and doing like, a school production or something that way.
Yeah.
You went on to studies at Grant MacEwan.
I did.
You've since returned back to town. Musicals are obviously a passion of yours.
Yeah.
And not only the hits, but also the flops too, like the ones you explore in your podcast, Monkeys and Playbills, which you host alongside Paul De Gurse, who's going to be joining you for this performance.
Inception.
Now, Inception. That was sort of a long way to get around to this question, I suppose. You've worked closely together with Paul for a long time.
Yeah.
For those who haven't had the experience, what's it like working with him?
Oh, okay. He's one of my favorite humans because I feel like when we are performing together, it's a conversation. So I learn new things about the orchestrations, about the music itself, just by hearing Paul play it. It's so fascinating. Like one of the songs that we're doing tomorrow, I had a massive realization about it in rehearsal with him, and we got to geek out about it together. And it was fun because I've known this song since I was like 15 years old, and I heard it anew with Paul in our rehearsal in his basement. Like, how amazing is that? So I just feel really lucky to get to collaborate with him and to get a chance to do this alongside him, because it's rare that that opportunity comes along.
Yeah, it's a gift when someone helps open your ears, right? And it also sounds like great music happens in basements, whether it's VHS singing along or rehearsals with Paul.
Yes.
I mean, good things are happening in basements. Can you tell us some more about the singers? I mean, we just heard a little bit of Julie Andrews right off the top. And I mean, she's just got this glorious and clear and yet nimble voice.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the other singers and more specifically their styles that are going to be featured in the program?
Totally. So just before we recorded, we were talking a little bit about how quickly the shift has to happen within this set list. So we go from things that are more of a contemporary placement, like we hear some of the Patti LuPone stuff, and she has this big, brassy, wide, broad sound. And then we go to a more focused sound with Kelly O'Hara in The Light in the Piazza. And so it's really been a test of my vocal agility and stamina, but also wonderful to explore how many differences there are even within a decade of each other.
It's very true. Do you find as a performer, you almost model yourself after those different styles? Like, do you hear their voice in your head when you're rehearsing these tracks, or is it about making it your own?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot because there's no way for me to do Ethel.
Right.
Like, there's no way for me to do Barbara.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. And I feel like rather than me aiming for what they did, I think honoring how they performed is probably the closest I can get to that. So I try to do it more from a stylistic perspective, from a phrasing perspective, rather than like an actual sound thing.
Well, audiences are going to have to come on down to the Radio JCC to hear you and see you tomorrow. That's 2 p.m., 123 Doncaster. Tickets available at radiojcc.com. Jillian, really appreciate you coming in this morning.
Thank you.
And we're going to hear a little selection from a more recent hit to close out our chat. Would you mind setting up Defying Gravity from Wicked? Can you tell us a bit about this tune?
You just did it. No, I'm just kidding.
No, tell us more. Tell us more.
Okay, so we actually killed two birds with one stone with this one, because we get to hear a little bit of Kristen Chenoweth, and we also hear Idina Menzel. So this is from the 2003 Stephen Schwartz musical Wicked, and this is the iconic Defying Gravity.
Thanks for being here, Jillian.
Thank you.